Alright, so I have wanted to, for some time, make a series on some of the cars that we've got here in the shop, whether or not these cars are long-term cars, permanent residents, short-term cars or whatever. I thought I would quickly put together some videos on, the basic rundown of the cars. So I thought I'd start today with one of my personal cars, which is the 1999 VT Commodore SS. So this is a car that I ended up buying purely because I'd never had an experience with an Australian car, Commodore or Falcon or anything to that effect. So I thought it'd be a good time to, get into the Australian car market. And this is just before it kind of, all of the factories closed down more or less, or at least, Holden and Ford, which are our local manufacturers. So Holdens are kind of globally known as the, the stable brand for the Australian GM market. So where to begin? I wanted to build the car as just like a normal, nice street car, 4 doors, 5 seats and all the rest of it. My son had just been born, so I needed something a little bit more, I suppose, practical. So I wanted the boot space. It started getting to the point where I was beginning to look for reliability, which is ironic because now I've got this huge blend of super reliable cars and unreliable cars. So the idea was just to build it as a nice, clean street car. So it went through like the first iteration, which was all basic stuff, bolt-on, headers, intake, full exhaust, and a tune. And it made good power. I think it made like 230 kilowatts or something to that effect. I'll do the calculation into horsepower there. And I was pretty happy with the car for a little while, but as things progressed, I just wanted a little bit more. So we all went into lockdown. So I had plans that year to travel to Japan and do a number of different bits and pieces, and none of those actually eventuated. So really the only choice that I had at the time, to get me through, or I guess to scratch that itch, was to build the car. It then went through its second transformation and pretty much where it's at now. So to put into perspective, I bought the car 3.5 years ago, I think now. No, 4 years ago now. I bought it completely standard, except for the headers/extractors. And it came on some really, really terrible 20-inch wheels. I swapped those out immediately for the only set of wheels that belong on a VTSS, which is the factory 17s. Visually, I haven't really done a great deal, or actually anything at all. In fact, I put a tow bar on it. I wanted a little bit of practicality and that car park insurance of having a tow bar. Its second iteration, I should say, I decided to look at a power adder. So I was thinking initially to go a really, really strong, naturally aspirated combination, significant headwork, lift the compression and do all sorts of things to get a real strong, naturally aspirated package. That didn't really eventuate the way that I wanted it to. It wasn't going to be economical for me to do that. So I decided, I'll go down the path. I decided to go supercharged. Engine-wise, the basic breakdown is it's a stock 5.7 litre, stock heads, stock bottom end. It has 853 casting heads, which arguably the worst castings that came on the early LS1 engines. A updated fuel rail to suit the supercharger, or I'm going to call it a blower, because that's what we call it. It's a blower. 80-pound Bosch injectors to suit that fuel rail. It runs a Harrop Performance HTV 1900 blower. Outside of that, it's on the standard pulley. There is plans in the future to maybe look at going to the smaller pulley and doing a little bit more with the fuel system. It runs a water-to-air Harrop intercooler from the front. It has a VCM Performance airbox. It has the Gilmer drive upgrade on the back of the blower. When they're engineering, the pulleys and stuff and the ratios and everything else, they factor in a amount of slip. The pulley will produce X amount of boost, factoring in X amount of slip. Now I got the blower, I did get the blower second hand. It had only done a little bit of Ks. The guy that I got it from had done the Gilmer drive upgrade for the rear pulley. Essentially what happens is the car will stay on the target boost, but that slip factor that's normally factored into what sort of boost that pulley is going to produce is no longer there. So I think it was meant to be producing around 10 PSI, but with the Gilmer drive on the back, it kind of peaks at around 12 PSI. Backing onto the engine, I've got a pretty strong automatic setup. Of course, it's not the most favorable. It is a built 4L60E. It does have a 3.6 stall converter. It's also got a B&M Pro Ratchet stealth shifter. Drivetrain wise, stock drivetrain from the transmission back. Braking wise, it's got a full rebuilt factory braking system. Pads, the calipers are rebuilt from before. There is obviously some relatively affordable upgrades for the brakes. I haven't gone down that path purely because I don't want to lose the 17s, so it's very hard to find a good strong braking performance setup that works with the factory 17s. I love the factory 17s. I have no intention of changing them, but if push comes to shove and I do need to change the braking system, or I feel like I'm running out of brakes, if we do tickle the motor and whatever a little bit further, then in that stage I will look at upgrading wheels if I have to. Interior wise, it is a completely factory SS interior. There's been no upgrades to it. The interesting thing about the car, and what actually explains the plates, because a lot of people confuse it for Go VTSS, and that is definitely not what it is. It's actually meant to be Government SS. It's read as Government SS. This car was a ex-police car, and as far as I could find out, or as much information that I could get about it, it wasn't actually a highway patrol car. This was used as a detective car. The police package, you do get a couple of bits and pieces that differentiate it from the standard SS. Those is you have the wood grain trim interior surround. It also has a switch that's hidden and tucked away once they've finished their service, that allows you to entirely black out all of the lights, interior and exterior, when you're going to do a sneaky on someone and you're going to pull them over. It's got a full exhaust system from the motor all the way back. It is a 3-inch system, but I have retained all of the factory resonators and mufflers throughout the system. It still has catalytic converters. So despite the fact that it is a loud package when it gets going, it actually is pretty subtle. I've fitted the B&M Pro Ratchet shifter, and that's probably the only thing that's a dead giveaway from the outside in. There was a couple of changes I needed to make for that. So I needed to fit a Calais cluster. So Calais is a trim level for the Commodores, for those that aren't familiar with it. And the Calais cluster actually has a gear position sensor. So that way I can actually see what gear I'm in, because the Pro Ratchet will only ever let you shift up gears, and it's got a neutral shifter lockout. Other not so subtle giveaways is a Autometer Pro Comp boost gauge. I've also got a Sport Comp transmission temperature gauge and a Pro Light oil pressure gauge. So in its second iteration, the car did make quite a bit of power, in fact more power than was originally expected by the tuner. Fitted the supercharger, the intercooler, and all the other various bits and pieces that go with it, like the water pump for the intercooler. I also did a drop-in fuel tank solution, so it is an in-tank pump that uses a factory mounting positions and factory wiring harness. The car was then tuned by only the best, and literally the best, Jason Kenny from LS1 Power in Holden. And the first time he span it up on the dyno, even on his safe tune, so he could limp it back to his shop, it made 320 kilowatts at the wheel. I was really happy. I was happy with about 300 ruble kilowatts. I would have been chuffed with that, but obviously the car made a little bit more. After that, we identified that the car had a pretty significant oil sump leak. Unfortunately, it is a little bit more complicated. So at that point, it became one of those situations where you really got to toss up what you're going to do, because while you're in there, you may as well. So we did a rear main seal, a performance cam, a VCM5 SC, which is obviously suitable for supercharge applications. So with the stock head casting, so no port polishing, no headwork whatsoever, we slid the cam in and put all the supporting hardware for it, so rockers and push rods and XYZ. The boost did come down, but the power still went up. So after we put the cam in it, we span it up again. Jason did his magic, did a little bit more touch-ups on the tune, and the car ended up being at around 370 real kilowatts. So in order to deal with the traction issues that you're inevitably going to have with that sort of power and that sort of torque, I got myself a set of Mickey Thompson Pro ET Street tyres. I had those mounted onto the factory wheels because if I ever was going to take it out or take it onto the strip, I did want to keep that sort of sleeper look that the car has. So obviously with the 3.6 stall converter and the gearing setup that it has 3.7 diff gears in it. A lot of people, when they're looking for that sort of initial 60-foot performance, they go for 411s and whatnot. I've stuck with the 3.7s that were in the car. The diff is tight. I've never had any issues with the diff, so I've just kept it as it is, and it's never let me down. The sort of performance that the car gives me and the practicality that comes with it, it's a lot of cars getting around now obviously make more power than that. Obviously with the emergence of E85 and stuff like that, people are making big numbers. With all of these series, I do want to kind of finish up on what the plans are with the car. Maybe in the future I might look at, going with that smaller pulley, putting a little bit more boost into it and maybe enjoying a little bit more power, not a huge amount of power, maybe around that 400 kilowatt mark would be nice. Obviously I've got a lot of pressure from a lot of the guys around me that are making good power on E85. We literally have a E85 service station like walking distance to our shop. So maybe at some stage I might consider going E85 and reaping the benefits of a terrible cold start and only a small amount of power. Or did I say that? Sorry, I didn't mean that. Sorry, E85 guys. I didn't mean that. But regardless, like I said, I mean, drivability wise, I don't have any major qualms with it. It drives relatively well for what it is. It gives me 1,000,000 miles per the mile, and that's what really matters to me. Despite the fact that I'd never really given these Aussie cars a chance, I'm glad that I did now, because even though I have endlessly grateful opportunity to drive a number of special cars and to be around special cars in general, it still does hit a certain part of my heart driving this car, knowing that, you know, despite the fact that I may not have tuned this one, I did put a lot of blood, sweat and tears into building this car. I've done a lot of small details. I spent somewhere in the effect of $300 on genuine Holden globes to make sure that all of the dash lit up correctly. You know, I haven't painted the car, it's factory paint. Car is, you know, almost exactly how you would option one if you were to buy one new. You know, Bermuda blue is probably the best colour for this series of Commodore. So yeah, that kind of wraps up the short video on the SS. If you guys have enjoyed this one, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon. That way any future videos in the series that do come up, you guys can follow along. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope you enjoyed the video.